Hey there, and welcome back to the Homemade Haven. Today I am out here in my green bean tunnel getting ready to harvest our green beans this evening. I wanted to take you guys along to show you how I'm preserving our green beans this season. We are getting several gallons of green beans per week, so I have to use methods of long-term preservation so that we can continue to enjoy these throughout the year. So today I'm going to show you how I use my pressure canner to make these green beans shelf-stable for many years to come. So we have made it into the kitchen and we are ready to start canning our green beans. This is a super easy process. Green beans are one of the items that I feel like pressure canning really saves a lot of time on. You can water bath things. People will tell you that you can't. Use your own discretion. People have been water bath canning everything for years. But for green beans specifically, you would have to water bath them for about 3 hours to make them shelf stable and safe. With the pressure canner, you can have this done in about an hour total. So it saves a lot of time, and when you have green beans coming off by the dozens, this is really the quickest and easiest way to do it. I can get in here, put them in the jars, process them, have it all done, and move on about my day. So let's get started. So I like to use the wide mouth jars. They're just easier for packing things like green beans. I can get my whole hand down into them and pack them really good and tight. You can use pint-sized jars. Your processing time will be a little bit less, but I like the quart wide mouth jars for putting up my green beans. But like I said, you can choose whatever you want. So these are brand new jars. They have not been sterilized or anything like that. I'm just taking a bottle brush and just going through with some warm soapy water and just kind of getting like the manufacturer smell off of it. According to the canning rules, you don't actually have to sanitize your jars if you are processing for more than, I believe it's 15 minutes, maybe it's 10 minutes, because it's hot enough to get rid of any bacteria or anything that could be on the jars when you first started. You also don't have to boil your lids and rings anymore if you have the ball Sure-Tight lids. These you don't have to pre-warm, they just will seal during your process. So they've made it kind of easy on us to take a little bit of the time and energy out of it, because otherwise you have like 3 or 4 pots going, so many different things, moving parts. So they've really expedited the process for us. So it's literally just pack the jars and go. Now, each recipe is going to have different requirements. As I've said, green beans are a super easy process, and this recipe is very easy and basic. I would recommend it as a first-time pressure canner recipe because it's fail-proof as long as you follow the instructions. You can have safe, shelf-stable green beans to put on your pantry for months and even years to come if they last that long. So as I'm washing up my jars, I'm gonna go ahead and get a pot of boiling water. I've got about 7 quarts of water in this pot here that I am gonna get to a rapid boil, because this is what we're gonna be adding on top of our green beans in our jars. All right, we're ready to start packing our jars. So these are our strung and snapped beans. I like to keep them about 2 inches or less. They just fit in the jars a little bit better. So I will be pouring them into this colander and just washing a batch at a time. I kind of eyeball about how many I think will fit in a jar at a time. And that way I can really rinse them very well, because if you fill up the colander, it's kind of hard to rinse all of the green beans at the same time. So just give them a good rinse. Make sure there's no buggies or little flowers or anything that doesn't belong. Then we're going to take one of our clean jars here and just pack it. And we're going to fill this jar as tight as we can, leaving an inch of headspace. Now there are tools to measure where your headspace is. I bought a kit that has all of the canning necessities that you need. I'll put a link in the description box below. This is a headspace measurer. It shows you an inch, 3/4 inch, 1/2 inch, 1/4 inch, and you just put it inside of your jar to show you exactly where that measurement is. I've also learned that you can use the rim of the jar to kind of gauge that. This bottom ring is about 1 inch, and then the middle ring is 1/2 inch, and you can just kind of eyeball where the 1/4 inches are at. We're gonna be filling these jars with boiling hot water, so the beans will soften up a little bit. So if they're kind of sticking 2 or 3 up above the 1 inch mark, it's not a big deal. Once they get that hot water on them, they're gonna soften and will fall down to that 1 inch mark. All right, so now that my 7 quarts are packed tightly, I'm gonna add about a 1/2 teaspoon of salt to each jar. Now you want a good quality salt. You can use canning salt, or you can use something that is non-iodized, so no table salt in this recipe. I like to use Redmond's Real Salt. They just have a really good quality salt, and you can buy it in bulk. I'll put a link to that in the description box below as well. Okay, so we are ready to start filling these jars with our boiling hot water. It is best to acclimate your jars a little bit. If your house is really cold, run them under some hot water before you pack them, because I have washed my jars in hot water just a few minutes ago. They're gonna be just fine. And most of the time your jars, as long as they're in good shape, aren't gonna bust on you. It's usually the ones that have cracks or imperfections that might crack or fall apart. So now we're ready to start ladling in this hot water into these jars. And we're going to fill them to the top of the green beans, leaving about 1 inch of headspace. Now, like I said, your green beans are going to soften a little bit, and they're going to fall below that 1 inch headspace area. You may wish to use a funnel to keep all of your liquid inside of your jar and not all over your counter. I usually do use a funnel for things that have some kind of brine or vinegar or sauce or something like that, but when it's just water, I don't really mind if it gets on the side of the jars or on the counter. It's not a big deal. The canning kit that I mentioned includes a really nice convenient funnel. I actually use this for a lot more than just canning. It comes in handy in the kitchen quite often. All right, so now that our jars have our hot water inside of them, I'm gonna take this press that I have. This is also another kit that I got, a fermenting kit. So these couple beans that are above the headspace, I'm just gonna lightly press down to get them underneath that water. Just like so. We have our jars all filled and packed, so we are ready to put our lids on. So we're gonna take a fresh, new, clean lid, and I'm just gonna dry it off because I did run my little scrubby brush over it just to give it a quick wash. Make sure you use a good, clean towel or washcloth. And then you're going to run your towel or washcloth around the rim of your jar. We're making sure that nothing is going to hinder the seal of this rubber ring that's here. So we're just going to set it right on top, try and align it the best that we can. And then we're going to take our ring and just tighten it until what's called finger tight. So I'm not going to use this hand to hold the jar and crank. It's just going to be as tight as I can do with my fingers without moving the jar. This is tight enough that whenever I try to unscrew it, it's not unscrewing, but it's also not moving the jar whenever I am tightening it on. You don't want to over tighten your jars, or the pressure could cause the lids to pop or the jars to bust, and you don't want them too loose either, because as the pressure builds inside the jar, you can lose a lot of your contents and it can prevent the jar from sealing. All right, so now it's time for the part that everybody seems to be afraid of, and I was too. My very first time canning, and even a few times after that, it really built up a lot of anxiety in me. But if you follow the instructions to the T and keep an eye on what's going on, it really isn't that hard, and the more you do it, the more confidence you'll build up. And then you'll be canning green beans every other day like I am throughout the summer. All right, so the first step is we're going to add some water to our pressure canner. Check your instruction manual to see exactly how much water your canner requires. Mine needs at least 3 quarts. It also has some lines on the inside of it to show me exactly where that's at. You can kind of see the dark ring inside of my canner because that's exactly where I fill it every time. It's just taken the polish off of this stainless steel, I guess, so it's just kind of worn there. So I know exactly where to pour my water at. Also, you need to make sure that you have the guard that comes with your canner or some other type of guard to prevent your jars from sitting directly on the base of your canner. You don't want your glass jars to be directly in contact with the bottom of the canner because it can cause them to break. It's just too hot. This little piece that comes with your canner is enough of a lift off of the floor of the canner to keep them from breaking. I'm gonna go ahead and fill this to my 3-quart line, and I use as hot of sink water as I can possibly use because it does kind of speed up the process a little bit. You can use the rest of your boiling bean water if you have some left over, but I still have more beans to put up this evening, so I'm gonna just hold on to that pot. All right, so stick it on our burner. I like to use my middle burner on my gas stove. It has the quick boil setting on it, so it gets really hot really fast. And also, out of my other burners here, it seems to be the one that I can control the temperature the best on. As you can, you'll kind of get to learn which of your burners is your best burner for canning, and I'll show you what I'm talking about whenever it comes time to regulate the temperature on this. Now, contrary to popular belief, you can can on a gas cooktop stove. Just check your user manual to see if it's rated for canning. We had glass cooktops before and I was able to use them because they were rated safe to can on. We changed our stove to gas once we moved in because it is more conducive to canning. It's just a little beefier. I can move this big pot on top of it and not have to worry about breaking the glass or scratching anything. And plus we just like the way that gas cooks. All right, so now we're going to add our jars inside of our canner here. My canner will hold 7 quarts, so you'll see how snugly they fit in there. If you don't have a full 7 quarts to can at a time, it's not a big deal. You can leave them separated. If you can, try to have one jar in the very middle of the circle. You can put just water inside of that jar as a placeholder. That will help your jars from toppling over while the pressure is building up. You don't have to, but it's just something that I like to do. All right, so all of our jars are loaded and ready to go, and we are ready to put our lid on. So on the Presto, it has an arrow that you line up with the arrow on the handle of the canner. Once you have that lined up, you just push it down slightly and twist it into place, and then it's locked and ready to go. We are ready to fire this thing up. I go ahead and put mine on full heat to get it going. We really want to bring this up to a rapid boil. And what we're looking for is here, our steam vent. We're looking for a nice even flow of steam out of this little tube. After a few minutes, you'll start to hear it boiling inside and doing some bubbling noises. You'll also notice you might get some like spitting outside of your pressure tube here. That's okay, that's normal. As it's building up pressure, it's going to kind of spit some condensation out. Your plug here, it can move and flex a little bit and even maybe sweat a little bit around it, but it should not pop out unless there's a problem. So now we're getting some spitting and we're getting a little bit of steam coming out of it, but it's not very consistent. So we're looking for a consistent stream of steam coming out of this pressure valve. All right, so now I have a good steady stream of steam here. I'm gonna put this little frying pan behind it so that you can see it a little bit better with the contrast. Now that I have a consistent stream of steam here, I'm gonna start a timer for 10 minutes. So we're just gonna let this continually steam for the full 10 minutes, and then we'll move on to the next step. During this phase, you might also notice that your pressure valve in the back or pressure lock will start to spit and sputter as well as the pressure continues to build up in there. That's normal as well. What's gonna happen is once we're ready to start building up the pressure inside of this pot to where the gauge starts to move, that lock is going to pop in place and it's going to hold all the pressure inside of the pot. So at this moment, the pressure is being released from the pot through this steam valve. All right, now that we have steamed for 10 minutes, we're going to put our weight on our pressure valve here. Make sure you wear a glove because there is active steam coming out of there. And you'll notice that back here, this pressure lock comes up into place once the pressure has been sealed inside of the pot. Okay, so now that our weight is on there, our temperature gauge should start moving. Now all of the pressure is being held inside of the pot, so your temperature gauge is going to show you exactly how many pounds of pressure are inside. We are aiming for 11 pounds of pressure. My little temperature gauge actually has a specific little marking on it because a lot of recipes only call for 11 pounds of pressure, so it's kind of like the sweet spot. So I'm climbing my pressure up to 11 pounds, and what I typically do myself is go a little bit past 11 pounds, and then I start backing off my heat a little bit to try and keep it in that range. Now, it's okay to go above 11 pounds. You don't want to get higher than, let's say, 15, because then you start getting too much pressure inside your pot. But, you know, 12, 13, 14 pounds is okay, and then back down to where you can bring it back to 11 pounds. You do not want your pressure to fall under 11 pounds because then you're gonna have to start your time all over again. It needs to hold at 11 pounds for 25 minutes solid, and that's going to kill all the bacteria that's inside your jars, maybe on your vegetables or in the water or what have you. The amount of pressure that you need inside of your pot may vary. according to your location. We are on the coast, so we are below 2,000 feet of altitude. We are basically at sea level here next to the beach. So be sure to refer to your owner manual of your pressure canner to tell you exactly what pressure you need to bring your canner up to and for how long. All right, so we have just hit 11 pounds of pressure and are actually going up towards about 12 pounds. So I'm gonna go ahead and start backing off my heat. I have it on like a medium high, so I'm gonna take it down to just a medium. And I'm going to sit here and keep an eye on it, because as soon as it starts to go back and gets close to that 11 mark, I'm gonna crank it back up again. And you might have to do this a time or two until the temperature regulates inside. Once you have it to where it's just the right amount of pressure, you shouldn't have to keep manning the temperature for the rest of the time. So being that we're at 11 pounds of pressure, I'm gonna go ahead and set another timer, this time for 25 minutes. Now, like I mentioned before, once your pressure and temperature are regulated and you get it sticking right in that 11-pound mark, you don't have to sit over it and babysit it anymore. If you can only get it to stay at maybe like 12 pounds of pressure or somewhere in that range, maybe 13, it's okay to let it process the full time at that pressure. As I mentioned, just don't let it fall below 11 or you're gonna have to start your timer all over again. If you are canning pints, you only need to process green beans for 20 minutes rather than 25 minutes. Okay, so I'm about 10 minutes into my 25-minute countdown, and it seems like my pot is keeping at 11 pounds now. If for some reason yours is not holding temperature or pressure at this point, don't worry about it. Just keep messing with your stove controls to try and get it to stay at that temperature. After doing this a few times, you'll kind of figure out where you need to have your settings so that it will find that pressure and stay there for you, so you don't have to keep standing over it for the full 25 minutes. All right, so 25 minutes is over and we are going to go ahead and cut the heat off to our burner. We're gonna watch this pressure gauge once again, and we're gonna let it come all the way down to 0. Once this comes all the way down to 0, your pressure lock here at the back of your lid should fall back down. Now, the pressure has not been fully released from this pot until this pressure lock is down. So even if your gauge says 0 and this is still standing, don't do anything to it just yet. Wait until that pressure lock falls down and then you move on to the next step. All right, so now our pressure gauge is down to a 0 and our pressure lock at the back has fallen. So we are going to carefully take off this weight, wearing a glove again, so in case there's any steam that comes out, we don't burn ourselves. We're going to start the timer for another 10 minutes and let this continue to air out. All right, and once 10 minutes is up, our levels are down, our lock is down, there's no more steam, we are ready to go ahead and open this lid. So we're just going to carefully twist it, and then we're going to open it away from us so that any steam that's left in the pot is not going to come right back in our face. And I usually let the jar sit in here for just another minute or two. You really don't want to shock your glass going from really hot to really cold or really cold to really hot. Take your time in this stage and make sure that you don't skip any of these steps coming down from pressure, because it can be a safety hazard and you can lose all of your hard work that you just invested into these green beans. All right, now we're ready to remove our jars from the pot. I have this little handy dandy grabber, which is also part of that kit that I keep referring to. This makes it really convenient for grabbing jars out, and you don't have to worry about getting your hands hot and all of that. So we're just gonna slowly bring them over to our little mat here. You can use like a kitchen towel or something. You probably don't want to put them directly on your countertop, being so hot. So as I am putting them on this mat, I'm leaving about an inch or two of space in between them, because you want them to have plenty of room to cool down and not be sharing each other's heat and overcrowding and all of that. So I'm trying to keep the jars as straight as possible as I'm removing them, because turning them while you're pulling them out could cause some liquid to get up under the lid and can prevent the seal, because these jars, not all of them are sealed at this point. As they start hitting the cooler air, you'll start hearing the pops and you'll know that they are sealed at that point. But you don't want to touch them or move them or mess with them for at least 12 hours. So make sure you're putting them in a spot that is not going to be in the way of something that you're doing over the next few hours. That way they can rest and continue to seal with no problem. All right, so there we have it. We have successfully pressure canned our green beans. All that's left to do is dump out the water in our canner there, let these settle for about 12 hours. Then we will remove the rings off of our jar, lift on the lid of the jar to make sure that they're good and sealed tight to the jar. You'll also notice that the lids will be good and flat, there won't be a bubble on top, and at that point you know that they are safe to put on your pantry shelf, so you can go ahead and write on the lids the date so that you can keep up with when you can them for storage purposes. But these green beans are so good made this way that I doubt they will last very long on your shelf. So thank you so much for joining me in this video. I hope that you learned something. If this is your first time canning, please mention it in the comments below. Let me know how this recipe worked for you. If you have any questions or comments, leave those below as well. Be sure to stick around for more garden harvest and preservation videos in the future. And until next time, we'll see you later.